Welcome to the electrifying world of the Marketing AI SparkCast, the go-to podcast for uncovering the revolutionary influence of artificial intelligence in the realm of marketing. Join Aby Varma, a visionary in B2B marketing, as he guides you through the dynamic and ever-evolving landscape where technology meets creativity. Each episode promises to ignite your curiosity and inspire you to harness the formidable power of AI to redefine the future of marketing. Get ready to fuel your mind with innovative ideas and trailblazing strategies that will set your brand ablaze in the digital marketplace.
So I speak to a lot of CEOs, CMOs, and marketing leaders who want to focus on AI adoption. And they'll come to me and say, hey, can Spark Novus, which is my consulting firm, can we help them with AI adoption? I always say, yes, we can, but to do what? And not always, but quite often, it's followed by a pause where they're not entirely sure what they need help with. And that is the focus of today's episode, where adopting AI by itself is not a strategy. I was at the Macon conference in Cleveland. That's the conference run by the Marketing AI Institute. It was in September. And lo and behold, I find myself sitting in a session with none other than my friend Rob Rose, who is our guest today. And Rob spoke just about that, about how AI by itself is not a marketing strategy. And for those of you who don't know Rob, he's a trusted advisor to global brands. He's a marketing and content strategist, podcaster, speaker, so many things. But basically, if you're in the world of marketing and content specifically, and you have not heard of Rob, then you have been living under a rock, my friend. But Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to see you, my friend. It has been far, far too long since we've been in the same room together.
Oh my gosh. I was thinking you and me got acquainted like early 2000s when you were driving strategy at Crown Peak. And I think I was with a B2B industrial technology firm, but yeah, it's been a while, Rob.
It has been a long time. We've both come through the world of the destruction of Web 1.0, the birth and destruction of Web 2.0, and here we are in the world of AI. We're both getting old.
I know, man. I know. I mean, like I said, it's hard for marketing and content and that not to be synonymous with the Rob Rose, but tell me about your journey.
Sure. It's a pretty long and winding tale, but the shortcut is Crown Peak was an enterprise web content management solution. So I got steeped, as it were, in the world of content strategy and how to manage and create structured content experiences. And ostensibly in those days, it was all about how to build and manage giant websites and blogs and those sorts of things for customers. And so as part of that, learned a lot about that whole idea. And I was the CMO of the company, and I had built a marketing team that was focused, and we knew we weren't going to be the Microsofts and Oracles and Hewlett Packards. And these are all the companies that we were competing with at the time, Adobe, who had all these enterprise content management systems that would be targeted toward enterprises. And so I ended up hiring, just because it was, my thesis was, we're never going to beat them with brand. We're never going to beat them with SEO. We're never going to beat them at money, but we can be a mile deeper than any of them can be, right? We can be the subject matter experts, and especially in the new burgeoning world of software as a service, cloud computing, and all of that sort of thing, which is what our service really was. And so I hired journalists, and I hired writers, and I hired designers, and I built this whole content team really as the core of my marketing team. And it worked, weirdly enough, and we grew, et cetera. And so I fell in love with that process and building that sort of function in my business. And then, as one does when a startup gets to a certain level, it really needed more adult supervision than I could provide. And so I said, it's time for me to get out of what I do best, which is helping smaller companies get to a certain level, and moved on. And I actually met this guy, Joe Polizzi, and he was starting this new thing called the Content Marketing Institute, a new startup that was really focused on this process that I'd spent the last 8 years building. And I was like, this is where I want to spend my time. So I joined him as the chief strategy officer at CMI, and we wrote a couple of books together, and we host a podcast together, as you say, and grew that organization. And I fed my family by doing consulting with larger, big brands on how to make content strategy and marketing and content really work together as a function in the business. And did that until 2016, when Informa came along and purchased Content Marketing Institute. So successful exit for my friend Joe. I still work for a living and have to actually earn money. So ultimately that went fine. And I actually spun up my own consulting firm in 2016 called Content Advisory. And that's what I've been doing for the last almost, 8 years. And yeah, it's been a fun ride. And along the way of teaching classes, another podcast, a couple of more books, and really just focused in on how does marketing really, which is now mostly content these days, how does it really function to help move the business forward?
Awesome. That's a heck of a ride.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride for sure.
So on your LinkedIn profile, I love this statement that you put. It's your story. I will help you tell it well. It was intriguing and interesting. I would love to hear the story behind that statement.
Sure. Its foundation is in the one of the things that I quickly realized, and this is going all the way back to the early days of Content Marketing Institute, was as I started working with these brands, it wasn't in the traditional agency kind of or creative agency kind of model. In other words, I wasn't coming in and telling them what their messaging should be, what their brand architecture should be, what stories they should be telling. And what I found over time was that in so many instances, those brands, the trouble that they were having wasn't articulating the whatever it was, their main value proposition, their main story. They were having a hard time collaborating and communicating with each other on how to tell it more consistently, more cohesively, in a more scalable way, and basically how to get it out there into the world, right? There was no shortage of great, wonderful, creative ideas. The challenge was we have bad technology and we can't figure out how to scale it. We have no communication and collaboration because we're all working in silos because we can't actually create a strategy to tell it consistently or cohesively across different platforms. So it was really born out of the fact that at the end of those engagements, what I would often say, and will often say now to new clients, is we're not the heroes of your story. In other words, when we submit ourselves for an award, you're not going to see the classic agency. We help them come up with this amazing creative idea and express. No, all I'm doing is teaching you how to fish, right? All I'm doing is helping you figure out how to take your creative ideas and express them better. And so ultimately came down to, I don't know your story. I will care about your story, but I'm not here to help you figure out what your story is. I'm here to help you tell it in the most expansive and most compelling and most consistent way that I possibly can.
That's awesome. If you are in a brand, it's hard for a third party agency to really articulate your brand value prop or brand story better than you. And speaking of storytelling, we're here to talk about AI. That whole
Yeah.
world, is going to change and is already changing. So let's start with what's your take on the whole AI movement? The first manifestations of AI for a lot of marketing organizations is content.
Yeah.
How do you feel about AI? Are you optimistic? Are you annoyed?
Well, I've been known forever to be, I'm not a glass is half full kind of guy. I'm a glass is fully full kind of guy. I operate from a foundation of gratitude, right? So of abundance. And so I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic. That said, I think one of the biggest, so AI, and we should probably be clear about what we're really talking about here is generative AI, right? So we're not getting into sort of pattern recognition for diagnostic of disease control and some places where AI is truly having exponentially types of development. But here we're talking about literally generating content or generating or expressing ideas through different interfaces that will help us do that. And I think you speak about storytelling, right? I think in so many cases, one, we just have to recognize that AI was the gift that none of us were asking for, right? Now, if you had said, "Hey, listen, when's the absolute worst time to bring out something that's going to help us create more misinformation, create more disinformation, and basically create more and more average content out in the world? When would that time be?" I got it right before a presidential election, right? So so we didn't ask for this, but we got it. We got this amazing innovation that somebody gifted you a Ferrari and now is saying basically you have to learn how to drive it. And and so in many ways, I think so much of when we all know that the oxygen has been sucked out of the room when it comes to AI, in terms of that's all anybody can really think about and talk about right now. But I think in so many ways, two things have happened. One is we haven't figured out what it really means yet as consumers and users of it. And so we're still really struggling with that. And the second thing is, and this is probably more to the point of the sort of optimism or cautious optimism, is that the creators of these solutions are not telling a very good story. They are not at all creating a interesting and safe place for innovation to happen. And I think I put that right at the feet of the OpenAIs, the Microsofts, the Googles, the Perplexities, the Claws, and all other sort of the bigger AI solutions out there who are making the technology the hero of that story. And we, as consumers of it, are being challenged to be worthy of that hero. And I think that's exactly the wrong way for us to move into this in a more seamless and valuable way. We're stumbling into this, basically trying to figure out how it's going to not cause the destruction of the world, when actually it's just another tool. It's just another tool and innovation that we can apply to all of the strategies that we have.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way to think about it, because you're right. All these different tools and technologies and LLMs burst onto the scene without any guardrails. And we as users are supposed to figure out and stumble along while we are enamored by the power that this can, give all of us.
Yeah.
And,
People forget that going all the way back to, you and I are old enough to remember the very early days of the burgeoning internet and e-commerce and websites and all of that stuff. And the promises that were made then to say, this is going to save humanity. This is going to save the world. This is all of those sort of overwrought promises that happened. And what we always seem to forget as a group, as a culture, as a society, what we always seem to forget is that new innovations in technology meet us where we are. We don't meet it where the technology is. The technology is always way more than we can handle. And so it needs to meet us where we are, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's so true. And that said, I'm seeing a lot of people feel this sort of sense of power, which is coming from adoption of all these technologies. And at the Macon conference in Cleveland, in your session, you mentioned the Dunning-Kruger effect. And tell our listeners what that is and why that matters at this time of AI in marketing. And I'm saying AI in marketing, but AI in general.
Sure. Yeah. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias that two researchers came up with. I think in the 70s, I think they came up with it. And basically the idea is that it's ostensibly this idea that people who lack a particular skill or knowledge in a topic will also lack the cognitive ways of saying that, of knowing that they actually lack that skill. In other words, if you aren't good enough at something, if you lack knowledge, you will often overestimate your ability to know more about that. And the classic example of this is how many people became epidemiologists when COVID came around, right? All of a sudden, everybody knew everything about epidemiology and about the way that and that's the Dunning-Kruger effect, just writ large right there. Perfect example, right? And so the challenge with it in terms of AI, in terms of generating content, is if you think about it for a second, we're not at a state yet where generative AI pushes back on anything. So if I say, hey, listen, I want you to write a 500-word blog post on the topic of something I know nothing about, something or I know little about, and I want you to write a 500-word blog post on epidemiology or what diseases are out there and that sort of thing, it'll dutifully write that. And then you go, great. Can you do better? Can you actually create something better? And the AI will say, of course I can. And here's a new version of it. And you can continue to do that over and over again. But at no point will the AI go, hey, stop a minute. The third one was the best one. You need to relax and go back to the third one because that's the best there's going to be. AI will never do that. It will dutifully keep creating. And if you lack the knowledge to know what good looks like, what good is, it doesn't matter which one you pick, because if it looks good to you, you're going to use it. And ultimately, that may or may not be a good piece of content. And so the challenge or the crutch of AI as a hack or a way to get to some sort of valuable idea that we've never researched or don't know anything about as a human is flawed, because we will never be able to recognize it as good if we don't actually understand what it is we're looking at.
And are you seeing this in marketing and content?
100% this is happening in marketing and content right now. I'm seeing, you see it in its sort of like cartoonish sort of level, and they actually turned it off. But if you looked at LinkedIn maybe 6 months ago, 5 months ago, 4 months ago, I think they shut it off last month, which were all the automated AI generated comments that would be suggested to you at the end of a post. And they were cartoonishly bad, right? They were just awful. That's it. But people use them. You can see it in your comments where people were like, that is an impressive post that you've delved into there and changed the paradigm of my thinking. And you're like, because you recognize that's totally AI and that's totally not, that's the level of critical thinking that you take out and abstract that to a blog post or a white paper or an ebook or a website or marketing copy or ad copy. And now all of a sudden you've got mediocrity, right? It's just mediocrity at scale.
And this sort of lends itself to a really fundamental question about, which is what I opened the show with, which is for a lot of marketing departments, they're really looking at AI to be the messiah when it comes to strategy, to AI strategy, and AI is not marketing strategy. You spoke about that, and are you seeing brands and marketing leaders treat it as such? Like in your Make On session, you addressed it. Why did you feel the need that this needs to be addressed at this point?
Yeah, it's the challenge. And this comes back to this idea of the companies are not helping this by telling the story about their technology that they are. What they're doing is they're creating the FUD, the fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt at that senior leadership level. If you don't get into AI, you're falling behind, right? You're losing efficiency, you're leaving money on the table. And that's the pressure that the practitioners feel to quote unquote get good at AI and get good at AI quickly. And or it could be as a small business too, where literally the practitioners are the business owners. But in many cases, it's larger organizations where quote unquote experimentation is happening. Figure it out. And it's not dissimilar from somebody back in the, let's call it late 1800s, walking into the business and saying, hey, guys, we need to get good at electricity, right? How do we get good at electricity? How does electricity help us? Let's develop an electricity strategy. Or in the early 1900s, if somebody's saying, hey, we need to get good at telephone. What's our telephone strategy? That's not a strategy. It's an innovation that might be applied to a strategy. And so in so many ways, and I know you and your clients, you work with this a lot, which is and you even mentioned it at the top of the show, it's like, when you say, I need an AI strategy, it's like, you need an AI strategy for what? For what is it you want to apply this innovation to? And that's where we have to start. We have our gig that we often call getting ready to get ready for AI. And it's actually understanding what strategy you might apply to AI, not necessarily AI itself.
Yeah, absolutely. AI for the sake of AI is really nothing. That's a really a myopic way of thinking about it. So you, Rob, help brands out in integrating AI into their content strategy or marketing strategy, the for what part, right? How do you approach it or how do you guide them?
Sure, we do it. And it goes back to, and thank you for noticing the whole, it's not our story. We just help you tell it. Our goal when we think about AI is to figure out exactly what I just said, which is once you understand what's really going on in the way that you create your marketing, you create your content, you manage your campaigns, you collaborate on them with different groups in the organization, then you get them ready for launch, you get them ready for publishing, you publish them, you launch them, you measure them, and then it's the classic life cycle, right? The classic life cycle that everybody's familiar with. But what most companies don't understand is how all that happens, right? It's usually very siloed, completely organic or grown up organically like weeds in the backyard. And when you ask a CEO or a CMO, and I get the same kind of pause that you get, would you say, tell me about your content creation strategy process, or tell me about your marketing campaign process? How does that stuff get created? Like, I don't know. It's just a black box. I throw some ideas in and magically 6 weeks later out the other side from an agency comes magic, right? It's like, because we don't understand that process, we don't understand where we can optimize that process. As it was said, with no standards, there can be no improvement, right? So with no process, you can't figure out what it is you need to improve. And so we go in and we help them think through what is your current content process from ideation all the way through to measurement, and how do we codify that, document it, and create it so that we can now identify the gaps of where applying something like AI might actually make sense, so that you're not just willy-nilly like spaghetti against the wall experimenting with various use cases, that you're actually targeting various areas with specific use cases to see if they actually improve your process or actually make a meaningful contribution to scalability or measurability or whatever it may be.
Yeah, love it. It's value as your North Star.
Yes,
Right.
that's right. That's exactly right. And it's the pragmatic approach, right? Instead of saying, let's just look at all the tech, I was in my talk, I quote this, I think he's the founder of Anthropic, and he was on a stage once and he was saying this as a humble brag, but he was basically saying a bank had come to their company with 500 use cases for generative AI. And they were saying, can you help us with these? And of course, he was looking at it through the lens of, this is a company that needs my technology in the worst way. They have 500 use cases of it. And when I hear that though, when I hear I've got 500 use cases for AI, that says, tell me you don't have a strategy without telling me you don't have a strategy. It's just literally, we want to just throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. It's exactly how we bought marketing automation in 2004, my friend, when we were back then, right? We got promised all these features that marketing automation could do, everything from personalization to managing the process through every buyer's journey that we could possibly do. And we went, great, I've got 500 use cases for that. And then we started to implement it and realize we're not ready for 499 of them.
Yeah. Just email. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So speaking of use cases, 100% right. We'll see there is no shortage of use cases, no shortage of ideas, but how do you channel them? How do you work with teams and really extract the value or almost categorize or prioritize these use cases that would help them and apply the concepts of AI to those use cases to craft a cohesive strategy around that? What is your process for that?
When we're asked to do that, it's a 3-step process, and spoiler alert, step 2 often gets put to the side. And so here's what I mean by that. So step 1 is what we call an operations or a content orchestration audit, where we actually go in and figure out what's in the black box. And we actually figure out how does the sausage really get made? How does content get made? How does marketing campaigns get made? How are they measured? And then basically figure out what are called the occurrent processes, OCCURENT, occurrent processes. We used to say tribal knowledge. We don't say tribal knowledge anymore. We say occurrent processes. It's basically what's really going on, not what's documented, not what's in the PowerPoint presentation, not what's in the user manuals, but what's really happening in the business. And so auditing and looking and really getting into the depth of that is step number 1, because what we find is that there's stuff happening that nobody knows about, right? The way that Bob and Jim and Mary do their jobs is some of it works fantastic, but some of it works only because that's the only way they've ever known how to do it. And so that documenting that and really understanding that, and then coming to step 2, which is to say, here's what should be. Here's the right approach, the operation, the orchestration for content that should exist, and campaigns and all the rest of it that should exist in your marketing teams, whether it's, again, one region or global. And so you say, great, there's what should exist. And then 3 is to start mapping those things and saying, here are the specific use cases where we want to test AI, where we want to test AI to say, in this process, we want to test this. In that process, we want to test that. Now, I'll tell you, coming back to the spoiler alert, step 2, the actual improvement piece, is often because there's such a hunger to get into AI. What we usually say is, this is the ideal. So we're going to test AI against these individual ideals without actually rolling it out yet. We're actually, because it's just going to take too long for us to roll out this new idealized content process. So we'll test it against the new test, right? We'll use that as the parameters of the use case, but we're not actually going to make the change yet until we actually can do it all in one fell swoop, which is to integrate AI technology into parts of, whether it's content management, whether it's digital asset management, whether it's workflows, whether it's content creation processes, all of the different areas, measurement processes, wherever it's going to make the most sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you find that, and this is an approach for a lot of marketing teams, where if they are part of a larger process, they are looking at AI to only solve that one point solution? And is that a flaw? Or should people pause and zoom out and look at the big picture and approach it that way? Or even try to solve these little mini processes? Is that a legitimate way to approach it?
Yeah, so I think it can be. I think it certainly can be. If you understand your processes, if you understand how things get made, or parts or portions of it, right? So for example, I know a lot of organizations that have an amazing process when it comes to things like a very siloed area, right? For example, how our PR, comms, news content, how that gets made, how that gets published, what the stories are, that part of the organization understands its processes really well. Fantastic. What we can do is we can skip right to the end and go, is there one small part of it that we want to test, right, with AI and see if it's better because of it? Or we know that this is going to be an issue, right? And then it becomes a question of saying, okay, how are we going to solve that, right? Is it through an embedded tool? You can't buy a piece of software these days where Gen AI isn't embedded into the tool, whether it's Google Docs or Microsoft Word or Canva or Figma or whatever, wherever you're going to, or are you going to buy a point solution that's going to solve that one thing for that one particular thing, like literally a grammar checker or an editorial tone guidelines checker, or those sorts of point solutions when it comes to writing and creating and editing and managing sort of quality of content? Or are you going to go with the sort of OS approach, right? Are you going to buy something that's going to be foundational to your entire company, but you're only going to solve this one piece first, right? So you're going to buy a sort of customized learning model with a Claude or an Anthropic or OpenAI or whatever it is, and you're going to build your own custom learning model and have it be an enterprise level solution where it's acting as the operating system or brain of the organization. And then you're going to build one application for now with the idea that you're going to scale into multiple applications later. That becomes a really hard decision, and again, to bring it back to the early 2000s, not unlike the early decisions about enterprise web content management. Are you going to solve one blog, or are you trying to solve every website you manage? And there's not a good answer for that unless you start to think through what your long-term strategy is.
So you do a lot of content yourself. You speak, there's a podcast, there's books, there's blogs, there's LinkedIn posts. Do you personally use AI?
Every day. Yeah, every day.
What do you use, and what do you use it for? And more importantly, what do you not use it for?
I'm using right now, I'm using primarily a paid version of OpenAI's ChatGPT. I've tried some of the others, and for whatever reason, I find ChatGPT the easiest to use. There's no other reason than that. It's not like I did an extensive test right now. So it's been the easiest for me to get my head around the way that they manage content and the way that it organizes my thoughts. I use it primarily for what I would call derivative content. In other words, if I say, okay, I've written a piece, like I've written my original content idea, but I don't like the way paragraph 4 is really flowing. And I'll say, look, I'll feed the whole thing in, and I've fed in all my stuff. So it knows my style, and it knows the way that I write, and it knows the way that the words that I use. And so I fed in my books, I fed in many of my blog posts. And so I built what they call a custom GPT to do this. And I'll say, in my own words, how about you reformat this paragraph so that it flows a little better, or so that it's more clear? And it almost always gets it wrong, but it occasionally gets it really right with it. It's clearer, it's shorter sentences, it gets me a point higher on the Hemingway sort of the test. So because I tend to overwrite things. I tend to be way more overwriting than underwriting. And so it sometimes very much helps. And then I use it a lot for, okay, now give me the abstract of this document. Give me the meeting summary. Give me the 300 word version, and give me the 1,000 word version, right? So taking it and using it to create shorter pieces, truncated pieces, summaries, all the derivative content that I might need for different channels is my primary use. I'll give you one example of that. I wrote a long blog post around the CMI's newest B2B research. And I wrote a long blog post about it, and I wrote a piece that was, call it 2,000 words, as a commentary for the research report itself. But I wanted to put a post on LinkedIn. Obviously, I can't have it be 2,000 words. There's a limitation to your length of LinkedIn post. So I had it write my 200 word version of that 2,000 word piece. And I went in and edited it and basically created it, and it worked beautifully. It works beautifully for that, what I call derivative content.
Nice. And perfect segue into your findings in that report. In the world with the advent of AI, you get lots of ways where people are rethinking the approach, and it's making things more accessible, especially podcasting and video content and text to video coming down fast and furious. What do you guys find?
I think what I said in my post, and what I think the most remarkable thing is how unremarkable the results were this year. And what I mean by that is that for the last, really since the pandemic, so we skipped the pandemic year. And so since the pandemic, we've seen really no change in a lot of things. How content marketers and marketers are feeling success, it's pretty average. What the challenges are, budgets and resources, what things are going on. And so the net of it all is that, at least what I took away was, in so many ways, B2B marketers are just keeping the lights on, right? There is so much, we have gotten so wrapped around the axle of fixing things, maintaining things, and really just basically ongoing maintenance of what it is we're doing, that there's very little swing for the fences innovation going on. And I think what you're seeing in the lack of sort of emergence of anything truly innovative or creative in the world of B2B marketing is an exact result of that, right? So there's just not a lot of interesting stuff happening because there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of doubt, there's certainly a lot of maintenance going on. And when there are innovative projects going on in big companies, it's usually, okay, we'll try it out. They don't get promoted very well. They don't get supported very well. And if it's not basically incrementally giving us one more rank up in search engine results, or incrementally going from 15% to 17% conversion rate, or we're testing out 18 shades of blue on the call to action button, it's like, that's what B2B marketing has become these days, rather than this interesting creative innovation thing where we're creating content products that we can really drive our business forward. And so my take on it was, I'm hoping that's a poke in the chest for B2B companies to say, let's take this and actually start doing something in 25. Let's actually start looking outside, whether it uses AI or not. Let's actually start doing some creative, interesting things that starts to differentiate us in the world again, so that we can actually start moving back into paths of growth.
Yeah. And was these findings surprising to you, given the sort of AI tsunami that is hitting all of us?
Interesting. Yes and no. I think one of the takeaways was there's certainly a lot of experimentation and AI use happening, right? And so when we think about that, we looked at what are the top uses of AI. And it was interesting because what it showed me was that the top two uses were, one, researching topics. In other words, getting to a topic. And that goes back to our Dunning-Kruger effect. And then two, creating content, right? And so if you think about it, what we're doing is we have so much other stuff we have to do to check the boxes to make sure that we're doing phase 4 of the CMS isn't going very well. Marketing automation, we haven't used the features that we need to teach. Personalization, everybody's talking about personalization, but we don't have access to the data or the analytics, and how are we going to get that? We got to cross silos and all that kind of stuff. And when we ultimately get to the end of this, we don't have any time to think about what content we should be writing or what cool new innovative thing. So again, we're just checking a box. Oh, we can lean on AI for that. We can lean on AI to tell us what we should be writing about, or actually creating the content for us. And so that is worrisome to me in many ways for B2B marketing more broadly. It was not surprising and surprising all at the same time. I'm excited about it. I'm truly excited about all the technologies, from music to video to text to all of it. I'm super excited about. I guess my soapbox, if I have one, is all about not using it as a crutch, right? So I think that's the balance. In other words, so back in the days when you and I were kids, we had Cliff's Notes, which would basically help us pass the test, or not have to read Romeo and Juliet, or not have to read any of Shakespeare, because we could just simply read the Cliff's Notes. But honestly, the first warning that they say on the front page of every Cliff's Notes is, you should read the text, you should read the book, you should read the play, and use this as a study guide. And even when I look at something like having Notebook LM or a piece of AI summarize a longer piece of content, I'm not using that as a crutch. In other words, I'm not using that instead of actually reading the text and understanding the nuance and helping me grow as a human with skills, empathy, wisdom, right? I want that growth as a human. So I want that friction, that valuable friction that going through the deeper part of the work provides. And what I do is I use AI to balance that, to say, where can it help me get to that friction faster? And if it can help me summarize something, if it can help me do that, if it can help me understand and get into the text quicker, that's a really wonderful thing. But it's not an excuse to not do the work. And that's the balance I think you have to accommodate in any kind of generative AI types of applications.
Wise words, Rob. Home stretch here. Parting thoughts. What are your thoughts, going back to the beginning of this episode, about AI is not a strategy? So what is your one takeaway, one piece of advice to our listeners who are marketers predominantly, on how they should think about it and what they should do?
It's really just, it's explore for yourself, right? Explore your own comfort levels with it. I don't buy into the whole situation, the bumper sticker advice of AI won't take your job, but somebody using AI will. I think it's cynical. And I also think it's not going to be true. However, it in the same way that telephone, electricity, and the same way that sort of those kinds of innovations pervade everything we do, AI is going to be a piece of that. And so it's Clayton Christensen once quoted, you may hate gravity, but gravity doesn't care. And you may hate AI, but AI doesn't care. And so my advice or parting thoughts is explore at your own pace, find the value where you find the value, and let everything else fall where it may.
Very cool. Rob, thank you very much. And if people want to connect up with you, obviously LinkedIn, but
LinkedIn is great.
talk a little bit about the content advisory, the website.
Yep. Contentadvisory.net is our little website, our little hovel on the web. And yeah, that's where we're putting all of our writing these days.
Awesome. Rob, thank you very much. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in and keep innovating.